In the heart of historic Charleston, South Carolina, where cobblestone streets wind between centuries-old homes and the salty air carries whispers of both tradition and change, a storm is brewing not just in the skies, but in the life of one woman. Meet Sophia Sophie Reynolds, a talented watercolor artist whose vibrant landscapes reflect the beauty of her beloved city, yet hide the turmoil within her own heart. At 42, Sophie is a devoted mother, a loving wife, and a woman on the brink of self-discovery. But as the shadows of betrayal creep into her life, she finds herself questioning everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the life she has built. What happens when the person you trust the most shatters your world? How do you navigate the turbulent waters of heartbreak while trying to protect your children? Can one woman's journey of pain and betrayal lead to unexpected renewal and rediscovery of her true self? As the autumn leaves fall, Sophie must confront her husband Tom's infidelity, forcing her to rise from the ashes of despair and reclaim her artistic voice. Join us on this emotional journey through the heart of Charleston as we explore the complexities of love, loss, and redemption. As you listen to Sophie's story, ask yourself, what would you do in her shoes? How far would you go to protect your family and your dreams? Your insights could inspire others who may be facing similar challenges. If you found this exploration of love, loss, and redemption meaningful, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Endless Romance, for more heartfelt stories and discussions. Together, let's continue to celebrate the beauty of life and the strength of the human spirit as we navigate our journeys. Your stories matter and we want to hear them. Join our community today. Sophie Reynolds believed there were moments when time stood perfectly still, rare instances when the universe seemed to hold its breath, and the ordinary transformed into something sacred. She'd experienced this phenomenon 3 times in her life: the moment she first held her newborn daughter Emma in her arms, the afternoon her son Noah caught his first wave on Sullivan's Island, and the day she'd said yes to Thomas Reynolds beneath the ancient oak at White Point Garden. Now, standing on the piazza of her historic South Battery home, watching the September sun cast golden light across Charleston Harbor, Sophie wondered if there was a fourth kind of moment, when time stopped not because of joy, but because some essential truth was revealing itself, whether you wanted to see it or not. "Mom, have you seen my portfolio?" Emma's voice broke through Sophie's reverie. At 16, her daughter was all contrast: Tom's dark hair and Sophie's sea-blue eyes, artistic sensitivity wrapped in teenage bravado. "Check the dining room table," Sophie answered, turning from the harbor view. "You were sorting photos there last night." Emma appeared in the doorway, camera bag slung over one shoulder. With her vintage Leica and penchant for black and white photography, she captured Charleston not as the picture-perfect postcard city tourists adored, but as a place of shadows and light, history and secrets. "Found it," Emma said, waving a leather portfolio. "Miss Hartley wants to see my work for the winter showcase. She thinks I might have a shot at the Scholastic Gold Key this year." Sophie smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Your night series is extraordinary, especially the one of the boats at dawn." Emma shrugged, but Sophie caught the pleased flush on her cheeks. "It's just shadows and light, Mom." "Isn't everything?" Sophie replied, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "Will you be home for dinner? I'm making shrimp and grits." "Can't. Photography club meeting. Then I'm shooting the sunset at Folly Beach." Emma paused, her expression shifting. "Is Dad coming home tonight?" The question hung between them, weighted with more than casual curiosity. Sophie felt that strange stillness again, time suspended in the space between truth and pretense. "He should be. His flight from Charlotte gets in at 6. She kept her voice neutral, a skill perfected over months of fielding the same question. Emma's eyes, so like Sophie's own, held hers for a moment too long. "Right. Well, tell him not to wait up. I'll be late." After Emma left, Sophie returned to her studio in the converted carriage house behind the main residence. The space was flooded with north light, illuminating half-finished watercolors and the organized chaos of her creative process. At 42, Sophie had finally reclaimed her artistic voice after years of setting it aside for Tom's career and their children's needs. She stood before her current project, a large-scale watercolor of the marsh at dawn, Spartina grass golden in early light, a solitary blue heron standing sentinel in the foreground. The painting was part of a series commissioned for the renovated Charleston County Library, her most significant professional opportunity in years. Sophie mixed a deeper violet for the heron's shadow, trying to focus on the technical challenges rather than the conversation with Emma. Her daughter's question had become a barometer for the family's emotional weather. Is Dad coming home tonight? A simple inquiry that measured the growing pressure system of their lives. Tom's business trips had increased steadily over the past year. Reynolds Investment Group was expanding its presence throughout the Southeast, he explained. Important client meetings in Charlotte. Potential investors in Atlanta. The explanations were always plausible, delivered with the same charming confidence that had first attracted Sophie to him 20 years ago at College of Charleston. She'd been a scholarship student at the art department, serious about her painting and unconcerned with the social hierarchy that still subtly governed Charleston society. Tom had been legacy business school royalty, his family's name on buildings and donor lists throughout the Holy City. Their meeting at a campus coffee shop he'd accidentally taken her Americano seemed like fate, their differences complementary rather than divisive. You see the world differently, he told her on their third date, studying one of her paintings with genuine admiration. You notice things other people miss. Sophie rinsed her brush, the water in the jar clouding with color. Lately, she'd been noticing things she wished she could unsee: receipts for restaurants nicer than typical business dinners, late-night phone calls taken in his study with the door closed, the growing emotional distance that felt like a tide gradually pulling him away from shore. The house phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Sophie dried her hands on a paint-splattered towel and reached for the receiver. "Sophie, darling." Her mother's voice carried the distinctive lilt of old Charleston, softened by decades in academia. Charlotte Montgomery-Lottie, to everyone who knew her, had been a force of nature in Charleston society, since arriving as a young English professor at the college nearly 50 years ago. Now 72 and widowed for a decade, she still served on half a dozen boards and committees, dispensing wisdom and occasionally bourbon-laced opinions with equal generosity. "Hello, Mom. How's the Sullivan's Island renovation coming along?" "The contractor says 2 more weeks, which naturally means Christmas if we're lucky," Lottie replied with a laugh. "But I didn't call about kitchen cabinets. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? There's something I'd like to discuss." Sophie recognized her mother's committee voice, the tone that had recruited countless volunteers and substantial donations over the years. "This sounds suspiciously official. What committee are you volunteering me for this time?" "Not a committee, darling. An opportunity. The Historical Society is revamping the annual gala, moving it to the Gibbies Museum this year, and they want to feature a local artist. I might have mentioned your name rather forcefully during yesterday's planning meeting." Sophie's pulse quickened. "The Gibbies? Mom, that's exactly where your work belongs," Lottie finished. "They're looking for a series that captures the essence of Charleston, not the tourist version, but the real soul of the place. Your Hidden Charleston series would be perfect." The opportunity was exactly what Sophie had been working toward: validation of her artistic vision beyond the decorative pieces that paid the bills. Yet even as excitement rose within her, she found herself calculating Tom's reaction. The gala was only 3 months away. Preparing a museum-worthy collection would require long hours in her studio, less availability for the social obligations Tom considered essential to his business. "I'd need to discuss it with Tom," she said, hating the hesitation in her voice. Pause on the line. "Since when does Thomas Reynolds dictate your artistic decisions?" "He doesn't, but But nothing, Sophie." Lottie's voice softened. "I watched my mother subsume her entire identity into my father's. I vowed never to do the same, and I raised you to be independent. What happened to the girl who once told me she'd rather starve in a garret than compromise her artistic integrity?" Sophie smiled faintly. "She grew up, had children, realized starving in garrets is overrated, and in the process, she's allowed herself to become an accessory to her husband's life." Lottie's voice was gentle but firm. "I've bitten my tongue for years, Sophie, watching you shrink yourself to fit into the space Tom allotted you. But lately, I've seen something changing in your eyes, the same look I had before I finally told your father I was accepting the professorship, with or without his blessing. That's different. You and Dad worked it out." "Yes, because your father was a good man who ultimately wanted my happiness. But first I had to remember what made me happy independent of him. Lottie paused. Lunch tomorrow? Magnolias at 12:30. All right, Sophie agreed. And I'll bring the miniature series you mentioned to Eliza Thornton. Perfect. Oh, and Sophie, wear that lovely blue dress. The one that matches your eyes. You look spectacular in it. After hanging up, Sophie returned to her painting, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Had she really shrunk herself to fit the space Tom allotted her? The question bothered her more than she wanted to admit. The sound of the front door opening drew her from the studio. Noah's voice called out, "Mom? I'm home." At 12, Noah was all gangly limbs and earnest enthusiasm, his sandy hair perpetually falling into eyes that matched the Charleston harbor on a clear day. Sophie found him in the kitchen, backpack dumped unceremoniously on a chair, head already in the refrigerator. "How was school?" she asked, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Good. I got an A on my marine ecosystem project." He emerged with a yogurt and spoon. "Dr. Blackwell says I can help with the new sea turtle rehabilitation tank this weekend if it's okay with you." Dr. Blackwell? The new marine biologist at the aquarium. Noah's face lit up with admiration. "He used to work with Noah on endangered species protection. He lets me help with actual research, not just the kid stuff." Sophie smiled, grateful for this adult who recognized her son's passion and intelligence. Noah had been withdrawing lately, quieter at home, his usual enthusiasm dampened. She'd attributed it to preteen growing pains, but now wondered if he was reacting to the changing atmosphere between his parents. "That sounds wonderful, Noah. Of course you can go." She hesitated. "I thought maybe your dad might take you fishing this weekend, but dash." "Dad's always busy," Noah interrupted, his voice carefully neutral. "It's fine. I'd rather be at the aquarium anyway." The practiced indifference in his tone broke Sophie's heart a little. When had her son learned to protect himself this way? "Well, I'd love to hear more about these sea turtles," she said, keeping her voice light. "After homework, though." "Deal." Noah nodded, already heading upstairs with his snack. Sophie watched him go, feeling that strange stillness again, time suspended in a moment of recognition. Her children were adapting to their father's absences, creating emotional defense mechanisms. The knowledge settled in her chest like a stone. The kitchen clock read 4:30. Tom's flight would land in 90 minutes. She should start dinner, set the table, maintain the rituals of family life even as its foundation shifted beneath her feet. Instead, Sophie found herself walking to Tom's study, a room she rarely entered anymore. Once they'd shared this space, paying bills together every Sunday evening, planning family vacations, discussing their dreams. Now it had become his exclusive domain. The door often closed when he was home. The room was immaculate, reflecting Tom's methodical nature. Leather-bound financial journals lined the bookshelves, interspersed with family photos in silver frames. Their wedding at St. Michael's Church, Emma's christening, Noah's first sailing competition. The images captured moments of genuine joy, evidence of the life they'd built together. Sophie sat in Tom's leather chair, running her fingers along the polished mahogany desktop. Without fully forming the intention, she opened the drawer where he kept his personal files. His organization was meticulous folders labeled by year and category, everything in its place. She hesitated, then pulled out the one marked Travel Receipts 2023. Inside, she found exactly what she expected. Neatly stapled expense reports, airline boarding passes, hotel folios. She flipped through them until she found last week's Charlotte trip. The Delta boarding pass was there, as was the Dunhill Hotel folio showing 3 nights stay. Sophie exhaled, relieved and slightly ashamed of her suspicion. She was about to return the folder when she noticed something odd. The hotel bill showed room service charges for breakfast each morning, but Tom had specifically mentioned attending a breakfast presentation on Wednesday. A small discrepancy easily explained, yet it snagged at her attention like a loose thread. She looked more closely at the folio. The room service charges were all for 2 people, 2 coffees, 2 breakfast entrees. Sophie's hands trembled slightly as she continued through the folder, now paying closer attention to the details of each trip. Patterns emerged. Dinners with unexpectedly high wine charges for business meals, room service orders for 2, Spa services at hotels added to the bill, something Tom had never indulged in during their 20 years of marriage. The front door opened, startling Sophie from her investigation. She quickly returned the folder to the drawer and stood, smoothing her paint-stained jeans. "Sophie," Tom's voice called from the foyer. "I'm home." She took a deep breath, composing herself before stepping into the hallway. "You're early. I thought your flight wasn't until 6. Tom set his briefcase down, loosening his tie. At 45, he remained as handsome as the day they'd met, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair now handsomely threaded with silver at the temples. The morning light streaming through the windows caught on his platinum wedding band as he reached to embrace her. Managed to catch an earlier connection. His kiss landed on her cheek, perfunctory and brief. "Where are the kids?" "Emma has photography club. Then she's shooting at Folly Beach. Noah's upstairs doing homework." Sophie studied his face, searching for what? Evidence? Guilt? The man she'd married? Tom nodded, already checking messages on his phone. "Good trip. Investors are in. 7 figures, just like I predicted." "That's wonderful," Sophie replied, genuinely pleased for him despite the unease churning in her stomach. "We should celebrate." "Definitely. Though I'll need to head back to Charlotte next week to finalize the details." He glanced up from his phone. "Everything okay here? You seem off." Sophie hesitated, weighing her options. Confront him with her suspicions based on room service receipts? Ask directly if he was having an affair? The questions felt simultaneously too dramatic and too mundane for the magnitude of what was at stake. "I'm fine," she said finally. "Just tired. I've been working on the library commission all day." "Ah, the watercolors." Tom's tone carried a hint of dismissal that once would have gone unnoticed, but now scraped against her awareness. "How's that coming along?" "Well, I think. Actually, there's something I wanted to discuss with you. The Historical Society is planning their annual gala at the Gibbies Museum, and they've asked me to exhibit my work." Tom was already moving toward his study, his attention divided. "That's nice, honey. When is it?" "December. It would mean preparing a new series, spending more time in the studio." He paused at the study door. "December? Sophie, that's our busiest social season. The firm's holiday party, the Charleston club events, the charity auction. You know how important those connections are for business." "I know, but this is important for my career." "It's the Gibbies, Tom. It's a significant opportunity." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, we can talk about this later, okay? I need to return some calls before dinner." The study door closed behind him, the soft click somehow more final than a slam would have been. Sophie stood in the hallway, that strange stillness descending again, time suspended in a moment of clarity. She walked to the kitchen and began preparing dinner mechanically, chopping onions and peppers for the shrimp and grits, her mind elsewhere. The room service charges for 2, the spa services, the growing emotional distance. Each piece of evidence small on its own, but together forming a picture she could no longer ignore. By the time Noah came downstairs, Sophie had made her decision. She would attend her mother's lunch tomorrow, wear the blue dress, and accept the Gibbies exhibition opportunity. And she would find out exactly what was happening in Charlotte next week. Some truths demanded to be seen whether you wanted to or not. Magnolia's restaurant hummed with the familiar rhythm of Charleston's lunch crowd, a mix of professionals from the nearby law firms and banks, well-dressed tourists, and locals conducting the business of the city's interwoven social circles. Sophie spotted her mother at a corner table, elegant in a cream linen dress, her silver hair swept into a chignon. "Darling," Lottie said, rising to kiss Sophie's cheek. "You look lovely. Blue has always been your color." Sophie slid into the chair across from her mother. "Thanks for suggesting it. I'd forgotten how much I like this dress." "Sometimes we need reminding of things we already know." Lottie signaled the waiter. "I've taken the liberty of ordering wine." "My treat." They ordered shrimp and grits for Lottie, crab cakes for Sophie, and fell into the comfortable pattern of mother-daughter conversation. Updates on Emma's photography, Noah's growing obsession with marine biology, and the latest restoration drama at St. Michael's Church, where both women served on the preservation committee. "Now," Lottie said, leaning forward after their plates were cleared, "have you thought about the exhibition? The committee needs an answer by next Friday." Sophie took a sip of wine, savoring its crisp brightness. I've decided to accept. I called the Historical Society this morning. Lottie's eyebrows rose slightly. And Thomas. I mentioned it. He wasn't thrilled about the timing, but... Sophie shrugged. This is important to me. I'm proud of you. Lottie reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. Your Hidden Charleston series will be perfect, those intimate glimpses of the city's secret places. Though you might consider adding a few larger pieces to anchor the collection. Sophie nodded, already envisioning possibilities, perhaps the marsh at dawn she was currently working on. Or a new piece capturing the harbor from an unexpected angle. Oh, I nearly forgot, Lottie said, her tone deliberately casual. Marjorie Simmons asked about Tom. Said she was surprised to see him dining at Peninsula Grill last Wednesday, when he told Richard he couldn't make their golf game because he was in Atlanta. Sophie's stomach tightened. There must be some confusion. Tom was definitely in Charlotte last week. Lottie studied her daughter's face. I'm sure you're right, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Marjorie's always been a bit of a gossip. As they walked along Broad Street afterward, Sophie found herself studying the familiar facades of Charleston's historic buildings with new eyes. She'd painted these streets countless times, always trying to capture not just their physical beauty, but the weight of history they carried, the centuries of joy and heartbreak, ambition and failure that had unfolded behind those gracious exteriors. Sophie, Lottie said, pausing at the corner where they would part ways. Whatever you're going through, and don't bother denying something's wrong, remember that you come from a long line of strong women. My grandmother survived the earthquake of 1886, the hurricane of 1893, and the Spanish flu. My mother endured the Great Depression and sent 4 brothers to World War II. I lived through the Civil Rights era and fought for my place in academia, when women were still expected to be secretaries rather than professors. She cupped Sophie's cheek, her eyes fierce with love. You have their blood in your veins. Whatever storm is coming, you will weather it. Sophie felt tears threatening and blinked them back. How did you know? That something was wrong, I mean. A mother knows when her daughter is troubled. And I've seen that look before in my own mirror many years ago. Lottie's expression softened. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. Sophie impulsively hugged her mother, drawing strength from her familiar scent of Chanel No. 5 and sea air. I love you, Mom. I love you too, darling. Now go paint something magnificent for the Gibbies. Back in her studio, Sophie found herself unable to focus on the marsh painting. Instead, she pulled out a fresh sheet of watercolor paper and began a new piece, a shadowy interior of an empty room. Sunlight streaming through tall windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. The composition emerged from her brush with unusual intensity, the contrast between light and shadow more dramatic than her typical work. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Emma enter until her daughter spoke. That's different, Emma said, studying the painting over Sophie's shoulder. Darker than your usual stuff. Sophie set down her brush. Sometimes we need to explore different perspectives. How was the photography club meeting? Good. Ms. Hartley loved my portfolio, especially the night series. Emma hesitated. She asked if I'd consider submitting to the Young Southeastern Artists competition. The deadline's next month. That's wonderful, Emma. Of course you should enter. Emma twisted a strand of dark hair around her finger, a habit from childhood that emerged when she was uncertain. Dad probably won't think it's worth the entry fee. He always says photography is just a hobby. Sophie felt a surge of protective anger. Your father doesn't get to decide the value of your art. If you want to enter, you'll enter. I'll pay the fee myself. Emma's eyes widened slightly at her mother's vehemence. Thanks, Mom. She paused, studying Sophie's face. Are you okay? You seem different lately. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just focused on my work. Sophie gestured to the painting. What do you think? Too dramatic? Emma considered the image, her photographer's eye assessing composition and light. No, it's powerful. The empty room feels like it's waiting for something to happen. Or like something important just did and we missed it. Something important just did and we missed it. The observation was so perceptive that Sophie felt a chill. When had her daughter become so insightful? Maybe you're right, she said softly. Maybe something did happen. That evening, Sophie prepared for bed with unusual care, applying the expensive face cream Tom had given her for Christmas, wearing the silk nightgown that had once drawn appreciative glances from her husband. Tom was in his study as usual, catching up on emails after dinner. When he finally came to bed, Sophie was sitting against the headboard, reading a novel she couldn't focus on. He paused in the doorway, seeming surprised to find her still awake. "Everything okay?" he asked, loosening his tie. Sophie set her book aside. "I was thinking about next week. Your trip to Charlotte. What about it?" Tom disappeared into the bathroom, his voice muffled as he brushed his teeth. "I thought I might come with you." She kept her tone casual, though her heart was racing. "I could visit the Mint Museum while you're in meetings. We could have dinner together in the evenings." Tom emerged from the bathroom, his expression carefully neutral. "That's not necessary, Sophie. It'll be all business late meetings, working dinners. You'd be bored." "I don't mind. It's been ages since we've had time alone together." She met his eyes directly. "I miss you, Tom." Something flickered across his face. Guilt? Regret? Annoyance? Passed too quickly to interpret. "It's not a good time," he said firmly, sliding into bed beside her but maintaining a careful distance. "Maybe we can plan a weekend away next month. Savannah, maybe. You always enjoy it there." Sophie felt the rejection like a physical blow. Still, she persisted. "What about Noah's science competition on Thursday? If you're in Charlotte, you'll miss it." Tom sighed, reaching to turn off his bedside lamp. "He'll understand. Business comes first sometimes. That's a lesson he needs to learn anyway. He's 12, Tom. The only lesson he's learning is that his father doesn't care enough to show up." The words hung in the darkness between them, sharper than she'd intended. Tom was silent for a long moment. "That's not fair, Sophie. I'm working to provide for this family, to maintain the lifestyle you and the children have become accustomed to." "None of us asked for this lifestyle," she replied quietly. "We just want you present in our lives." Tom rolled away from her, his back a wall between them. "I'm tired, Sophie. Can we please not do this tonight?" Sophie stared at the ceiling, listening to her husband's breathing gradually even out as he fell asleep. The distance between them felt insurmountable, a chasm widening with each passing day. In that moment, lying beside the man who had once been the center of her world, Sophie made her decision. Next week, when Tom left for Charlotte, she would follow him. Not to save their marriage, some intuitive part of her already knew it might be too late for that, but to face the truth, whatever it might be. Lottie was right. She came from a long line of strong women. Whatever storm was coming, she would weather it. October in Charleston arrived with a theatrical flourish, as if the city had grown tired of summer's oppressive heat and decided to reward its patient residents. The humidity lifted, leaving behind crystalline blue skies and temperatures that made the piazza the most coveted spot in any home. Sophie had always loved this season, the way the light changed, casting longer shadows and warming the city's pastel buildings to a rich golden glow in late afternoon. She was in her studio, packing the last of her paintings for delivery to a local gallery, when her phone rang. Tom's name flashed on the screen. "I have good news," he said without preamble. "The Charlotte investors are in. 7 figures, just like I predicted." "That's wonderful," Sophie replied, genuinely pleased for him despite the knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in her stomach. "When will you be home?" "That's why I'm calling. I need to stay through the weekend. The Prestons want to take us out on their boat Saturday, and it would be bad form to decline." Sophie's hand tightened on the phone. "Us. The team," Tom clarified quickly. "Melissa from marketing is here, and Jason from legal. Client relations stuff." Sophie dipped her brush in water, watching the paint cloud and disperse. "Noah will be disappointed about missing your fishing trip. Again. Tell him I'll make it up to him next weekend. Maybe we'll drive down to that marine research center in Beaufort he's been talking about." The promise sounded hollow even through the phone. Tom had been making it up to Noah for months now, each promised outing eventually canceled or postponed. "Sophie? You there?" "Yes," she said, making a decision. "Actually, Mom invited us to Sullivan's Island for the weekend. She's having some work done on the cottage and could use the company. I thought we'd go since you'll be away." "Good idea," Tom said, relief evident in his voice. "Give her my best." After they hung up, Sophie stared at the phone, her resolve strengthening. She'd already made arrangements for her impulsive trip to Charlotte's room at the hotel across from the Dunhill, where Tom always stayed, and a rental car waiting at the airport. Emma and Noah would stay with Lottie, under the pretense that Sophie was attending an art workshop in Asheville. The lies made her stomach churn, but they were necessary. She needed to know the truth, to see with her own eyes what Tom was hiding. Only then could she decide how to move forward. She called Lottie to confirm the weekend plans, carefully avoiding any mention of her Charlotte detour. Her mother would understand the deception, but Sophie couldn't bear to voice her suspicions aloud, as if speaking them might make them more real. That evening, she told the children about the Sullivan's Island weekend. Noah was immediately enthusiastic, already planning his tide pool explorations. Emma was more hesitant. What about my darkroom time? I need to develop the Folly Beach Sunset series. Grandma has that spare bathroom with no windows, Sophie reminded her. You could set up a temporary darkroom there. And the light on Sullivan's Island is spectacular this time of year, especially at dawn and dusk. You might capture some of those moody atmospheric shots you love so much. Emma twisted a strand of dark hair around her finger, considering the suggestion. I guess it could work, she conceded reluctantly. I've been wanting to try some shoreline compositions with longer exposures. That's the spirit, Sophie said, relief washing over her. These small moments of connection with Emma felt increasingly precious amid their family's unraveling. And Noah will be thrilled to have you there. He's been talking about showing you his favorite tide pools. Fine, Emma said, the hint of a smile softening her features. But only if Grandma makes her famous shrimp and grits. I think that can be arranged, Sophie replied, grateful for this small moment of normalcy. Perhaps a weekend away from this house, away from the empty spaces Tom had left behind, was exactly what they all needed. Sophie Reynolds believed there were moments when time stood perfectly still, rare instances when the universe seemed to hold its breath, and the ordinary transformed into something sacred. She'd experienced this phenomenon 3 times in her life: the moment she first held her newborn daughter Emma in her arms, the afternoon her son Noah caught his first wave on Sullivan's Island, and the day she'd said yes to Thomas Reynolds beneath the ancient oak at White Point Garden. Now, sitting in seat 14A of a Delta flight bound for Charlotte, Sophie wondered if there was a fourth kind of moment, when time stopped not because of joy, but because some essential truth was revealing itself, whether you wanted to see it or not. The flight attendant's voice broke through her reverie, announcing their descent into Charlotte Douglas International. Sophie gazed out the window at the sprawling city below, so different from Charleston's intimate historic district. Tom had always praised Charlotte's dynamism, its forward-thinking economy, everything that Sophie found both impressive and slightly unsettling. First time in Charlotte? The elderly gentleman beside her asked, noticing her intent gaze. No, Sophie replied with a small smile. My husband comes here often for business. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. Business. Such a convenient word, encompassing everything and nothing. After collecting her rental car, a nondescript silver sedan, Sophie drove directly to the Ivy's Hotel, where she'd reserved a room under her maiden name. She'd chosen it specifically for its location across from the Dunhill, where Tom always stayed. From her 6th-floor window, she had a perfect view of the Dunhill's elegant entrance, its revolving door spinning with the comings and goings of business travelers and tourists. Sophie sat by the window watching, waiting. She had brought her sketchbook and a small watercolor set, but they remained untouched in her bag. This wasn't a trip for creativity. It was a mission of confirmation. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Sophie ordered room service but barely touched the club sandwich that arrived. As afternoon faded into evening, the streetlights flickered on, casting pools of golden light on the sidewalk below. She began to wonder if her impulsive trip had been a mistake, a desperate act that would yield nothing but more uncertainty. Then, at precisely 7:42 p.m., Tom emerged from the Dunhill's entrance. Even from a distance, Sophie recognized his confident stride, the way he adjusted his cuffs as he stepped onto the sidewalk. He wore his charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, the one reserved for important client dinners. But it wasn't Tom's appearance that caused Sophie's breath to catch. It was the woman beside him, tall and elegant in a fitted red dress, her dark hair swept up to reveal a graceful neck. Tom's hand rested at the small of her back as he guided her toward a waiting taxi, the gesture intimate and familiar. Sophie felt physically ill, a wave of nausea rising as she watched them drive away. Despite her suspicions, some part of her had clung to the hope that she was wrong, that there was an innocent explanation for Tom's behavior. That hope evaporated now, replaced by a cold certainty. Her husband was having an affair. With trembling hands, Sophie changed into a simple black dress and heels, applied fresh makeup and headed downstairs. The concierge was helpful, recommending several upscale restaurants where business dinners typically took place. Sophie thanked him, then requested a taxi to the Capitol Grill, first on his list. The restaurant was dimly lit and elegant, filled with the murmur of conversation and the clink of silverware against fine china. Sophie asked for a table near the back, where she could observe the room without being immediately visible. She ordered a glass of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir and pretended to study the menu while scanning the dining area. Her vigilance was rewarded when Tom and the woman in red entered, following the maitre d' to a corner booth. They sat close together, their body language suggesting intimacy beyond a professional relationship. When Tom reached across the table to take the woman's hand, Sophie had to look away, the gesture too painful to witness. She signaled for the check, unable to bear watching them any longer. As she waited, she overheard snippets of conversation from a nearby table, two men discussing a pharmaceutical conference at the Westin. Quite a presentation by Parker from Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Those new diabetes treatments could be game changers. Parker's always impressive. Did you catch her earlier session on market penetration strategies? Sophie froze, her attention caught by the name. She glanced back at Tom's table, studying the woman more carefully. Could she be this Parker person? A pharmaceutical representative would certainly cross paths with investment bankers looking for promising ventures. Outside, Sophie took a deep breath of the cool October air, trying to clear her head. She'd seen enough, more than enough. Her husband was clearly involved with this woman, whether she was a pharmaceutical rep or not. The details hardly mattered now. She walked back to her hotel, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. In her room, Sophie sat by the window again, watching the Dunhills' entrance. Hours passed. Just after midnight, a car pulled up, and Tom emerged with the woman in red. They paused on the sidewalk, and then, as if to remove any lingering doubt, Tom pulled her into a kiss that left no question about the nature of their relationship. Sophie turned away, unable to watch any longer. She'd come for the truth, and now she had it. The knowledge settled over her like a heavy blanket, smothering but also strangely clarifying. The uncertainty that had plagued her for months was gone, replaced by a painful clarity. She would not confront Tom here, in this unfamiliar city. She would return to Charleston, to the home they had built together, and decide there what came next. This was not a conversation to have in hotel rooms or restaurants. It would happen on her territory, in the space where they had once been happy. Sophie barely slept that night. When dawn broke, she packed her small bag, checked out of the hotel, and drove to the airport in a daze. The flight back to Charleston passed in a blur of recycled air and unwanted thoughts. By the time she pulled into her driveway on South Battery, Sophie felt oddly calm. The initial shock had subsided, leaving behind a strange, hollow feeling as if she'd been emptied out and was waiting to see what would fill the space. Inside, the house was quiet and still, the children still at school, Tom still in Charlotte with his lover. Sophie walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them with new eyes, the antique furniture they'd collected over the years, the family photos on the mantel, Emma's photography displayed alongside Sophie's watercolors. This was her home, the place where she'd raised her children and built her life. The realization that it might not remain so sent a fresh wave of pain through her. But beneath the pain was something else, steely determination that surprised her with its strength. Sophie climbed the stairs to their bedroom and began methodically packing Tom's belongings. Not everything, just enough for a few weeks. His favorite suits, casual clothes, toiletries. She worked efficiently without anger or tears, as if completing an ordinary household task. When she finished, she carried the suitcases downstairs and placed them in the guest room, closing the door firmly behind her. Then she went to her studio, where the light streamed through the windows, illuminating her works in progress and blank canvases waiting to be filled. Here, surrounded by the tangible evidence of her creativity, Sophie felt her strength returning. Whatever happened with Tom, this part of her identity remained intact. She was an artist, a mother, a daughter of Charleston. These core truths would sustain her through what lay ahead. She picked up a brush and began to paint, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of creation. By the time she heard the children's voices in the main house, the canvas before her had transformed a stormy seascape, waves crashing against a rugged shore, but with a faint light breaking through dark clouds on the horizon. Sophie spent the weekend at Sullivan's Island with the children, drawing strength from the familiar rhythms of beach walks, board games, and her mother's unwavering support. She told Lottie everything, the words pouring out of her as they walked along the shoreline, waves erasing their footprints behind them. "I went to Charlotte," Sophie said, her voice nearly lost in the sound of the surf. "I saw Tom with another woman." Lottie's step faltered briefly, but she didn't seem surprised. "I suspected as much. Marjorie Simmons isn't the only one who's noticed discrepancies in his stories." "You knew." Sophie turned to her mother, a flash of hurt cutting through her composed facade. "I suspected," Lottie corrected gently, "but it wasn't my place to voice those suspicions without evidence. And honestly, darling, would you have believed me if I had?" Sophie considered this, then shook her head. "Probably not. I needed to see it for myself. And now that you have, what will you do?" "I don't know yet." Sophie watched Emma photographing Noah as he leapt over incoming waves, their laughter carrying on the sea breeze. "We're going to talk when he gets back on Tuesday. After that." She shrugged, the gesture encompassing all the uncertain possibilities ahead. "Whatever you decide, you won't face it alone." Lottie squeezed her daughter's hand. "You and the children will always have a home here if you need it." The simple offer of support brought tears to Sophie's eyes for the first time since her discovery. "Thank you, Mom." On Tuesday afternoon, Sophie stood in the kitchen, her hands steady as she arranged fresh hydrangeas in a crystal vase, a ritual of normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. She dressed with particular care, choosing a blue dress that had once been Tom's favorite, not out of any desire to please him, but as a reminder of her own worth and beauty. At precisely 2 o'clock, she heard Tom's key in the lock. Taking a deep breath, Sophie moved from the kitchen to the foyer, standing tall as her husband entered their home. Tom looked tired, his usually immaculate appearance slightly rumpled from travel. He set down his briefcase, loosening his tie as he offered Sophie a distracted smile. "Hey, good to be home." He leaned in for his customary kiss on her cheek. Sophie stepped back, avoiding the gesture. "We need to talk, Tom." He sighed, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "Right, you mentioned that. Can it wait until I've had a shower? The flight was delayed, and I've been in these clothes since Dash." "I was in Charlotte last week," Sophie interrupted, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I saw you with her." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of shock across Tom's face. For a moment he seemed frozen, unable to respond. Then his expression shifted, moving through surprise to calculation to resignation in rapid succession. "Sophie, I can explain Dash." "Don't." She held up a hand. "Please don't insult me with lies. I saw you together at the Capitol Grill. I saw you kiss her outside the Dunhill." "I know, Tom." He stared at her, apparently reassessing the situation now that denial was no longer an option. "How long have you suspected?" "Months. The late-night calls. The business trips that multiplied. The emotional distance." Sophie's voice remained calm, though her heart was racing. "I didn't want to believe it, but part of me knew something was wrong." Tom moved toward the living room, sinking onto the sofa as if his legs could no longer support him. Sophie remained standing, maintaining the physical and emotional high ground. "Who is she?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. Tom hesitated, then answered reluctantly. "Gabrielle Parker. She's a pharmaceutical sales representative. We met at a conference in Atlanta last year." "And how long has this been going on?" "6 months." He looked down at his hands. "It wasn't planned, Sophie. It just happened." The glitch struck Sophie as both painful and absurd. Affairs didn't just happen like rainstorms or traffic accidents. They involved choices, hundreds of small decisions that prioritized selfish desire over commitment and family. Nothing just happens, Tom. You made choices. Every lie, every canceled family event, every night you spent with her instead of here with your children, those were all choices. Tom's expression hardened slightly. You're not innocent in this, Sophie. You've been emotionally absent for years, so wrapped up in your painting and the children that there was no room left for me. The accusation stung, but Sophie refused to accept the blame he was trying to shift. If you felt neglected, you could have talked to me. We could have gone to counseling, found ways to reconnect. Instead, you chose deception. Would you have listened? Tom challenged. Every time I mentioned your art as a hobby, you got defensive. When I suggested you attend more business events with me, you complained about the superficiality. We were growing in different directions, Sophie. So instead of addressing that directly, you found someone else. Sophie's composure was beginning to crack, anger seeping through. Do you love her? Tom looked away, unable to meet her eyes. I don't know. Maybe. It's different with Gabby. She understands my world, shares my ambitions. The casual nickname Gabby sent a fresh wave of pain through Sophie. This wasn't just sex. It was intimacy, connection. The very things that had once bound her to Tom. I've moved your things to the guest room, she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. You'll stay there until we decide next steps. Tom's head snapped up, surprise evident in his expression. You're not asking me to leave? Not yet. The children deserve better than their father disappearing overnight with no explanation. Sophie took a deep breath. We'll tell them together that we're having problems and taking some space from each other. After that, we can discuss separation terms. Sophie I'm not finished, she interrupted. I will not be humiliated in my own community. Whatever is happening between you and Gabby, it stays in Charlotte or Atlanta or wherever you conduct your affair. It doesn't come to Charleston, and it certainly doesn't come near our children. Tom nodded slowly, seemingly relieved that she wasn't immediately demanding divorce. That's fair. And what about us? Is there any chance we could I don't know. Sophie cut him off again. Right now, I can barely look at you without seeing you with her. I need time, Tom. Time to process this betrayal and decide what I want for my future. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, breaking the tense silence that followed Sophie's declaration. The children will be home soon, she said, turning toward the kitchen. I suggest you unpack in the guest room and prepare yourself for a difficult conversation. As she walked away, Sophie felt a strange mixture of emotions: grief for the marriage she was losing, anger at Tom's betrayal, but also an unexpected sense of liberation. She had faced the truth and survived the confrontation. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage. Telling the children was every bit as difficult as Sophie had anticipated. She and Tom gathered Emma and Noah in the living room after dinner, sitting across from them with careful space between themselves on the sofa. The physical distance spoke volumes, and Emma, perceptive as always, immediately tensed, her photographer's eye registering the visual evidence of their estrangement. We need to talk to you both about something important, Sophie began, her voice gentle but firm. Dad and I have been having some problems in our relationship, and we've decided to take some space from each other while we figure things out. Noah's eyes widened, darting between his parents. Are you getting divorced? We don't know yet, Tom answered, his professional composure faltering slightly. Right now, we're just taking a step back to evaluate our marriage and what we both want for the future. This doesn't change how much we love you, Sophie added quickly. Both of us will always be your parents, no matter what happens between us. Emma's expression had hardened into a mask of controlled emotion. This is about her, isn't it? The woman in Charlotte. Tom blanched, clearly unprepared for his daughter's directness. Emma Don't lie, Emma interrupted, her voice shaking. I'm not stupid. I've seen the texts on your phone when you leave it on the counter. I've heard you talking to someone named Gabby late at night. Sophie felt a surge of protective anger toward her daughter, who had apparently been carrying this knowledge alone. Emma, why didn't you say something? Emma shrugged, the gesture painfully adult. What was there to say? That I knew Dad was cheating? That would just hurt you more. Noah looked confused, the full implications not yet clear to him at 12. Dad's been seeing someone else? Like dating? Yes, Tom admitted, his confident facade crumbling under his children's direct questioning. "I've been involved with someone else, and it was wrong of me to lie to all of you. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused." The apology sounded rehearsed to Sophie's ears, but she remained silent, allowing the children to process this revelation in their own ways. Noah's eyes filled with tears. "But why? Don't you love Mom anymore?" Tom looked stricken. "It's complicated, buddy. Sometimes adults make mistakes. Big mistakes. It doesn't mean I don't love your mother or you and Emma." "That's such bullshit," Emma muttered, rising from her chair. "If you loved us, you wouldn't have done this." "Emma language," Sophie admonished gently, though she couldn't disagree with the sentiment. "I'm sorry, but it's true," Emma continued, tears now streaming down her face despite her efforts to appear strong. "You've ruined everything, Dad. Everything." She fled the room, her footsteps pounding up the stairs. A moment later, they heard her bedroom door slam. Noah remained, small and vulnerable, on the edge of the sofa. "Where will Dad live?" he asked Sophie, his voice barely audible. "For now, Dad will stay in the guest room," Sophie explained, reaching out to touch his hair. "Later, we'll figure out a more permanent arrangement." "Can I go to my room now?" Noah asked, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Of course, sweetheart." Sophie watched him trudge from the room, her heart breaking for both her children. When they were alone, Tom slumped back against the sofa. "That went well," he said with bitter sarcasm. "What did you expect, Tom? That they'd congratulate you on finding happiness with Gabby?" Sophie stood, needing physical distance from him. "You've shattered their world. It's going to take time for them to process this." "I never wanted to hurt them," Tom said, his voice low. "Or you. You have to believe that." "I believe you never planned for this outcome," Sophie replied. "But you made choices that inevitably led here. Now we all have to live with the consequences." She left him sitting there and climbed the stairs, pausing first at Noah's door. She could hear him crying softly inside. Sophie knocked gently. "Noah? Can I come in?" When he didn't answer, she opened the door anyway. Noah lay curled on his bed, clutching the stuffed sea turtle he'd had since he was 3, a comfort object he normally kept hidden, embarrassed by its childish associations. Sophie sat beside him, rubbing slow circles on his back. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." "Is it my fault?" Noah asked, his voice muffled against the pillow. "Because I spend too much time at the aquarium? Because I'm not good at sports like Dad wants?" "No," Sophie said firmly, turning him to face her. "This is absolutely not your fault. Not in any way. This is about Dad and his choices, not about you or Emma or anything you've done or not done." Noah sat up, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Will we have to move? Change schools?" "No, not right now," Sophie assured him. "We're staying right here in this house. Your life will continue as normally as possible." "Nothing's normal anymore," Noah said with a wisdom beyond his years. Sophie couldn't argue with that. Instead, she held him close, letting him cry until his tears subsided into hiccuping breaths. "I love you, Mom," he whispered eventually. "I love you too, Noah. More than anything in this world." After Noah had fallen asleep, still clutching his sea turtle, Sophie went to Emma's room. Unlike Noah's door, which had been unlocked, Emma's was firmly shut, a do not disturb sign hanging from the Nabe relic from a family trip to New York years ago. Sophie knocked anyway. "Emma? It's Mom. I don't want to talk," came the muffled reply. "I know, but I'm going to sit out here until you're ready." Sophie slid down the wall opposite Emma's door, prepared to wait as long as necessary. After nearly 20 minutes, the door cracked open. Emma's face appeared, blotchy from crying but set in a determined expression. "You don't have to sit on the floor," she said grudgingly. "You can come in." Emma's room reflected her artistic sensibility, black and white photographs covering one wall, a vintage record player in the corner, books on photography stacked beside her bed. She'd been in the middle of developing prints. Several hung from a makeshift clothesline strung across one corner, dripping onto towels below. "These are beautiful," Sophie said, examining a stark image of the Sullivan's Island lighthouse silhouetted against a stormy sky. Emma shrugged, but Sophie could tell she was pleased by the compliment. "It's for my portfolio. Ms. Hartley thinks I should apply to RIS's summer program." That's wonderful, Emma. You should definitely apply. Emma sat cross-legged on her bed. Did you know? About Dad and her? Sophie chose her words carefully. I suspected something was wrong. I didn't know for certain until I went to Charlotte last week. Is that why you went? To spy on him. To confirm what I feared, Sophie corrected gently. I needed to know the truth before confronting him. Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. Are you going to divorce him? I don't know yet, Sophie admitted. That's a big decision that will affect all of us. I need time to think clearly about what's best. I think you should, Emma said with surprising vehemence. He doesn't deserve you. Sophie moved to sit beside her daughter on the bed. Marriage is complicated, Emma. People make mistakes. Sometimes relationships can heal from those mistakes. Do you want to heal it? Emma asked, studying her mother's face. After what he did? I don't know, Sophie repeated honestly. Right now I'm focused on you and Noah, on making sure you both feel secure and loved. Emma leaned against her mother's shoulder, a gesture of vulnerability she rarely showed anymore. We'll be okay, you know. Noah and me. We're stronger than Dad thinks. Sophie wrapped an arm around her daughter, marveling at her resilience. Yes, you are. You're both extraordinary. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle drip of developing solution from the photographs. Eventually Emma spoke again. I took some photos at Sullivan's Island last weekend, of the sunrise. I think they'd make good reference material for your paintings. I'd love to see them, Sophie said, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. Emma reached for her camera, scrolling through images to show Sophie. The simple act of sharing art, daughter to mother, photographer to painter, felt like a small miracle amid the chaos of their lives. Later that night, alone in the master bedroom that had once been hers and Tom's, Sophie stood at the window overlooking the garden. The moon cast silver light across the camellias and azaleas, creating a monochromatic landscape that reminded her of Emma's photographs. She thought of her children, each processing this upheaval in their own way. She thought of Tom, sleeping in the guest room down the hall, his presence both familiar and alien now. And she thought of herself, the woman she had been, the woman she was becoming. Lottie's words came back to her. Asterisk, you have their blood in your veins. Whatever storm is coming, you will weather it. Asterisk. The first wave had broken over her, but Sophie remained standing. And in that moment of clarity, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next, she would weather this storm, not just survive it, but emerge stronger on the other side. Sophie sat in Rachel Bennett's office, watching her college friend and now divorce attorney review the financial documents spread across her desk. 20 years of marriage reduced to bank statements, investment portfolios, and property deeds. You're in a stronger position than you might think, Rachel said, setting down the last page. South Carolina is an equitable distribution state, and with Tom's infidelity documented, the court will likely be sympathetic to your position. I don't want to destroy him, Rachel, Sophie said, absently twisting her wedding ring, a habit she hadn't yet broken. I just want what's fair for me and the children. Fair includes acknowledging your contributions to the marriage, Rachel pointed out. You put your career on hold to raise the children and support Tom's business. That has value. Sophie nodded, thinking of the years she'd spent managing their home, entertaining Tom's clients, volunteering at the children's schools, all while trying to maintain her artistic identity in the hours between responsibilities. I want to keep the house, she said decisively. The children need stability right now, and my studio is there. We'll make that a priority, Rachel agreed, making notes. What about alimony and child support? I need enough to support myself and the children comfortably while I rebuild my career, Sophie said. The Gibby's exhibition could open doors, but it will take time to establish a steady income from my art. Rachel looked up, a smile softening her professional demeanor. I'm so proud of you, Sophie, not just for standing up for yourself in this divorce, but for reclaiming your artistic voice. That exhibition is long overdue. Sophie felt a rush of gratitude for this woman who had been her friend since their freshman year at College of Charleston, when Sophie was a scholarship art student and Rachel was already planning her path to law school. Tom was served with the divorce papers yesterday, Rachel continued, returning to business. Based on his initial reaction, I expect we'll hear from his attorney by the end of the week. How do you know about his reaction? Sophie asked, puzzled. Rachel's smile turned slightly mischievous. Charleston is a small town, Sophie. My paralegal's husband works in Tom's building. Apparently, there was quite a scene when the process server arrived. Sophie winced, imagining Tom's embarrassment and anger. Despite everything, she took no pleasure in his humiliation. What happens next? She asked, steering the conversation back to practical matters. We'll schedule a temporary hearing to establish interim support and custody arrangements, Rachel explained. In the meantime, I suggest you continue documenting everything: Tom's time with the children, any conversations about finances, his comings and goings. Sophie nodded, mentally adding this to her growing list of new responsibilities. And what about? She hesitated. What about Gabby? Does she figure into the legal proceedings? Potentially, Rachel said carefully. South Carolina allows alienation of affection lawsuits, though they're relatively rare. We could pursue that angle if you wanted to, but it would mean a more contentious and public battle. No, Sophie said firmly. I don't want that. For the children's sake, I want this to be as civil as possible. As she left Rachel's office and walked along Broad Street toward her car, Sophie felt a curious mixture of sadness and relief. The legal machinery of divorce was now in motion, transforming her private pain into public record. Yet there was something clarifying about the process, the reduction of emotional chaos to orderly procedures and documented facts. The October afternoon was perfect, crisp and clear, with sunlight glinting off the copper roofs of Charleston's historic buildings. Sophie found herself drawn toward the Battery, where the harbor stretched blue and limitless beyond the seawall. She sat on a bench watching sailboats tack against the wind, their white sails bright against the water. How many times had she sketched this very scene? The familiar vista now seemed charged with new meaning, the boats navigating changing winds, adjusting their course to reach their destination. Ms. Reynolds. Sophie turned to find Ethan Blackwell standing nearby, his black Labrador retriever sitting patiently at his feet. Dr. Blackwell, she said, surprised. Hello. Ethan, please. He reminded her with a smile. Sorry to interrupt your thoughts. Cora and I are just out for our afternoon walk. The dog's tail thumped against the pavement at the sound of her name. Sophie sat in Rachel Bennett's office, watching her college friend and now divorce attorney review the financial documents spread across her desk. 20 years of marriage reduced to bank statements, investment portfolios, and property deeds. You're in a stronger position than you might think, Rachel said, setting down the last page. South Carolina is an equitable distribution state, and with Tom's infidelity documented, the court will likely be sympathetic to your position. I don't want to destroy him, Rachel, Sophie said, absently twisting her wedding ring, a habit she hadn't yet broken. I just want what's fair for me and the children. Fair includes acknowledging your contributions to the marriage, Rachel pointed out. You put your career on hold to raise the children and support Tom's business. That has value. Sophie nodded, thinking of the years she'd spent managing their home, entertaining Tom's clients, volunteering at the children's schools, all while trying to maintain her artistic identity in the hours between responsibilities. I want to keep the house, she said decisively. The children need stability right now, and my studio is there. We'll make that a priority, Rachel agreed, making notes. What about alimony and child support? I need enough to support myself and the children comfortably while I rebuild my career, Sophie said. The Gibby's exhibition could open doors, but it will take time to establish a steady income from my art. Rachel looked up, a smile softening her professional demeanor. I'm so proud of you, Sophie, not just for standing up for yourself in this divorce, but for reclaiming your artistic voice. That exhibition is long overdue. Sophie felt a rush of gratitude for this woman who had been her friend since their freshman year at College of Charleston, when Sophie was a scholarship art student and Rachel was already planning her path to law school. Tom was served with the divorce papers yesterday, Rachel continued, returning to business. Based on his initial reaction, I expect we'll hear from his attorney by the end of the week. How do you know about his reaction? Sophie asked, puzzled. Rachel's smile turned slightly mischievous. Charleston is a small town, Sophie. My paralegal's husband works in Tom's building. Apparently, there was quite a scene when the process server arrived. Sophie winced, imagining Tom's embarrassment and anger. Despite everything, she took no pleasure in his humiliation. "What happens next?" she asked, steering the conversation back to practical matters. "We'll schedule a temporary hearing to establish interim support and custody arrangements," Rachel explained. "In the meantime, I suggest you continue documenting everything: Tom's time with the children, any conversations about finances, his comings and goings." Sophie nodded, mentally adding this to her growing list of new responsibilities. "And what about?" She hesitated. "What about Gabby? Does she figure into the legal proceedings?" "Potentially," Rachel said carefully. "South Carolina allows alienation of affection lawsuits, though they're relatively rare. We could pursue that angle if you wanted to, but it would mean a more contentious and public battle." "No," Sophie said firmly. "I don't want that. For the children's sake, I want this to be as civil as possible." As she left Rachel's office and walked along Broad Street toward her car, Sophie felt a curious mixture of sadness and relief. The legal machinery of divorce was now in motion, transforming her private pain into public record. Yet there was something clarifying about the process: the reduction of emotional chaos to orderly procedures and documented facts. The October afternoon was perfect, crisp and clear, with sunlight glinting off the copper roofs of Charleston's historic buildings. Sophie found herself drawn toward the Battery, where the harbor stretched blue and limitless beyond the seawall. She sat on a bench watching sailboats tack against the wind, their white sails bright against the water. How many times had she sketched this very scene? The familiar vista now seemed charged with new meaning: the boats navigating changing winds, adjusting their course to reach their destination. "Ms. Reynolds." Sophie turned to find Ethan Blackwell standing nearby, his black Labrador retriever sitting patiently at his feet. "Dr. Blackwell," she said, surprised. "Hello. Ethan, please," he reminded her with a smile. "Sorry to interrupt your thoughts. Cora and I are just out for our afternoon walk." The dog's tail thumped against the pavement at the sound of her name. "May I?" Ethan gestured to the empty space beside her on the bench. "Of course," Sophie replied, shifting slightly to make room. Ethan sat, and Cora settled at his feet with a contented sigh. For a moment, they watched the harbor together in companionable silence. "Noah mentioned you might not be at the aquarium this weekend," Ethan said finally. "I wanted to check if everything was all right." Sophie hesitated, unsure how much Noah had shared. "We're going through some family changes. Tom and I are separating." Ethan nodded, his expression compassionate but not surprised. "I'm sorry to hear that. Noah's been quieter lately, but I didn't want to pry." "It's been difficult for both children," Sophie admitted. "Noah especially seems to be withdrawing." "He's still passionate about the sea turtles," Ethan offered. "When he's working with them, I see glimpses of his usual enthusiasm." Sophie felt a rush of gratitude for this man who saw her son so clearly. "Thank you for giving him that space. It means more than you know." "The aquarium's been a sanctuary for many of us," Ethan said, his gaze returning to the harbor. "After my wife died, I spent hours watching the jellyfish. Something about their rhythmic movement was steadying." Sophie remembered Noah mentioning that Dr. Blackwell was a widower, but hearing him reference it directly created an unexpected connection between them, a shared understanding of loss, though different in nature. "I've been finding my sanctuary in painting," she said. "The focus it requires doesn't leave much room for dwelling on what I can't change." Ethan smiled. "Noah showed me your website. Your work is extraordinary, especially the Marsh series." Sophie felt a surprising warmth at his praise. "Thank you. I have an exhibition coming up at the Gibby's Museum in December. I'd love to see it," Ethan said, then added quickly, "if that wouldn't be awkward." "Not at all," Sophie replied, finding she meant it. "I'd appreciate your perspective." Cora chose that moment to stand and stretch, clearly signaling the end of their rest period. Ethan rose, gathering her leash. "We should continue our walk." "But Sophie," he paused, "if Noah needs extra time at the aquarium, or if there's anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask." "Actually," Sophie said, surprising herself with her boldness, Noah mentioned there's a sea turtle being released next week. He's very excited about it. Stella, Ethan nodded, his eyes lighting up. She's a loggerhead we've been rehabilitating for months. Noah's been a tremendous help with her care. He talks about her constantly, Sophie smiled. I'd love to see the release if that's possible. Of course, Ethan replied, a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. I'll make sure you're on the list. It's quite a powerful moment, watching them return home. As she watched Ethan and Cora continue along the Battery Promenade, Sophie felt something shift inside her, a small but significant realignment, like a sailboat adjusting its course to a changing wind. The sea turtle release took place on a surprisingly warm day for November. Sophie, Emma, and Noah arrived at Isle of Palms, where a small group had gathered aquarium staff, volunteers, and a local news crew documenting the event. Ethan greeted them warmly, his focus immediately on Noah. Ready for the big moment? Stella's in the transport tank, and she seems eager to get back to the ocean. Noah nodded solemnly, clearly feeling the weight of responsibility. I double-checked her tracker signal this morning. It's transmitting perfectly. Excellent work, Ethan said, placing a hand on Noah's shoulder. You've been an essential part of her recovery. Sophie watched the interaction with a full heart, grateful for this man who had helped restore her son's confidence during such a difficult time. Dad! A girl's voice called out, and Sophie turned to see a slender teenager with Ethan's eyes hurrying toward them. Sorry I'm late. Mom's meeting ran long. Sophie, this is my daughter Lily, Ethan said, his expression softening with obvious love. Lily, this is Mrs. Reynolds, Noah's mom, and his sister Emma. Noah's told me about your photography, Lily said to Emma with shy admiration. I've been trying to learn, but I'm not very good yet. Emma, usually reserved with strangers, brightened visibly. I could show you some basics sometime if you want. The release itself was both solemn and joyful. Noah and another young volunteer carefully carried Stella's transport container to the water's edge. At Ethan's signal, they lowered it to the sand and opened the front panel. For a moment, Stella remained still, as if assessing her situation. Then, with surprising speed for such a large creature, she propelled herself forward, her flippers finding purchase in the wet sand until she reached the water. The small crowd cheered as Stella disappeared into a wave, only to resurface several yards out, her head briefly visible before she dove beneath the surface, returning to the vast ocean that was her true home. Sophie felt tears spring to her eyes at the beauty of the moment. She glanced at Emma, who was capturing the scene with her camera, and Noah, whose face shone with pride and a touch of bittersweet loss. She'll be okay out there? Noah asked Ethan, watching the spot where Stella had disappeared. She will, Ethan assured him. Loggerheads are incredibly resilient. They navigate by the Earth's magnetic field, and they remember the beaches where they hatched, even decades later. Like a homing instinct, Sophie murmured. Exactly, Ethan said, his eyes meeting hers. They always find their way back to where they belong. The moment was interrupted by the first drops of rain, unexpected given the clear sky just minutes before. Sophie looked up to see dark clouds gathering rapidly on the horizon, a dramatic shift in weather typical of coastal Carolina. Storms coming in fast, Ethan observed, his expression turning concerned. We should pack up. By the time they reached their cars, the storm had intensified dramatically. Wind whipped across the beach, sending sand stinging against exposed skin. The rain came in horizontal sheets, drenching them as they hurried to shelter. That escalated quickly, Sophie said, turning on the wipers at full speed. I've never seen a storm roll in so fast. It's a nor'easter, Ethan explained, having joined them in the vehicle at Noah's insistence. They can develop with remarkable speed this time of year. The drive back to Charleston was tense, with visibility reduced to mere yards in the torrential rain. By the time they reached the causeway connecting Sullivan's Island to Mount Pleasant, the storm had reached full fury, waves crashing over the guardrails in places. Maybe we should wait it out, Sophie suggested, pulling into a gas station parking lot. This is getting dangerous. Ethan nodded his agreement. The forecast says it should pass through quickly, but it's intense while it lasts. They sat in the car, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and watching lightning illuminate the churning waters of the harbor. Noah, exhausted from the emotional high of Stella's release, dozed in the back seat. Emma texted with friends, confirming that the storm was causing minor flooding throughout the historic district. "I'm worried about my exhibition pieces," Sophie admitted to Ethan, checking her watch. "The opening is in 3 weeks, and everything is still in my studio." "Is your carriage house prone to flooding?" Ethan asked. "Not usually, but this storm seems exceptional." She bit her lip, anxiety building as she imagined her work damaged by water. "As soon as it's safe to drive, we'll go check," Ethan promised. "Your work is too important to risk." The simple statement ** your work is too important * touched Sophie deeply. Tom had always been supportive of her painting in theory, but there had always been an undercurrent of dismissal, a sense that her art was a pleasant hobby rather than a genuine vocation. When the worst of the storm had passed, they made their way carefully through flooded streets to South Battery. Sophie's fears were realized when they pulled into the driveway and saw water pooling around the carriage house studio. "Stay here," Ethan told the children, already opening his door. "We'll check the damage." Sophie splashed through ankle-deep water to unlock the studio door. Inside, her heart sank as she saw water seeping under the far wall, already reaching the legs of her easel. "We need to get everything elevated," she said, immediately moving toward her completed exhibition pieces, which were fortunately stored on wall-mounted shelves. Ethan worked alongside her with calm efficiency, helping move paintings, supplies, and equipment to higher ground. They worked in focused silence, communicating with gestures and nods as they salvaged what they could. When everything was secured, Sophie stood in the center of the studio, surveying their work. The floor was wet, but her art was safe, protected from the storm's destruction by quick action and Ethan's steady help. "Thank you," she said simply, turning to face him. "I couldn't have done this alone." Ethan stood near the window, rain-soaked and slightly disheveled, watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "You're stronger than you know, Sophie. You could have done it alone if you had to, but you don't have to anymore." In that moment, surrounded by her art and the receding storm waters, Sophie felt something crystallize within her, a certainty about her path forward, about the woman she was becoming in the aftermath of her marriage's dissolution. "No," she agreed softly, "I don't have to do it alone anymore." The Gibby's Museum glowed with warm light against the December evening, its Renaissance Revival Fayade illuminated for the opening reception of Hidden Charleston, Tides of Change. Inside, Charleston's art community mingled with society patrons, critics, and Sophie's friends and family, all gathered to celebrate her artistic vision. Sophie moved through the crowd in a simple midnight blue gown, accepting congratulations and discussing her work with a confidence that felt both new and familiar, as if she were reclaiming a part of herself that had been dormant but never truly lost. Her exhibition had exceeded even her own expectations. The large-scale watercolors captured Charleston's essence through unexpected perspectives: the battery during a storm, dawn light on the marsh, a hidden garden glimpsed through an iron gate, the harbor viewed from beneath a centuries-old oak. Each painting revealed something intimate about the city, something that existed beyond the picture-perfect postcard images tourists cherished. "There she is," a familiar voice called, and Sophie turned to find her mother approaching, resplendent in emerald green silk. "The artist of the hour." Lottie embraced her daughter, then stepped back to study her face. "You're radiant, Sophie. Success becomes you." "It's not just the exhibition," Sophie admitted quietly. "It's everything, finding my voice again, standing on my own." "I know," Lottie said with understanding. "Independence has its own particular glow." They were joined by Emma, who had been documenting the evening with her camera. "The director of the museum was just talking to the Charleston Arts Quarterly editor about you, Mom. I think there's going to be a feature article." Sophie smiled, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Have you seen your brother?" "He's with Dr. Blackwell and Lily by the Harbor series," Emma replied, a knowing glint in her eye. "They're having what appears to be a very serious discussion about wave patterns." Sophie's gaze found them across the gallery, Noah gesturing animatedly as he explained something to Ethan and Lily, who listened with genuine interest. The sight warmed her heart. In the months since Tom's departure, Noah had gradually emerged from his shell, his natural enthusiasm returning as he found stability in new routines and relationships. "Your marine biologist cleans up rather nicely," Lottie observed, following Sophie's gaze. That charcoal suit fits him remarkably well. He's not my marine biologist, Mother, Sophie protested, though without much conviction. Not yet, perhaps, Lottie replied with a mischievous smile. But I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching. It's rather refreshing, a man who appreciates a woman's mind and talent first, her appearance second. Before Sophie could respond, she noticed a familiar figure entering the gallery. Tom, dressed impeccably in a dark suit, paused just inside the entrance, scanning the room until his gaze found her. He nodded slightly, his expression unreadable from a distance. Shall I run interference? Lottie offered, noting Sophie's sudden tension. No, Sophie said with surprising calm. It's fine. I should speak with him. She made her way across the crowded gallery, accepting congratulations from guests as she passed. When she reached Tom, she was struck by how different he seemed, still handsome, still polished, but somehow diminished, as if the confident Fade had cracked to reveal uncertainty beneath. Sophie, he said, his voice formal, the exhibition is remarkable. You've outdone yourself. Thank you, Tom, she replied, surprised by the genuine appreciation in his tone. I'm glad you could come. An awkward silence fell between them, 20 years of shared history and recent pain hanging in the air. I wanted to tell you, Tom said finally. I've accepted a position in Atlanta. I'll be starting after the new year. Sophie absorbed this news, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: relief that he would no longer be a constant presence in Charleston, sadness for what this would mean for the children, a strange sense of closure. What about the children? She asked, her voice steady. I'll drive up every other weekend as we discussed, Tom assured her. And they can visit during school breaks. I've found a place with rooms for them. Sophie nodded, appreciating his consideration despite everything. They'll need that stability. Tom's gaze drifted over her shoulder, and she knew without turning that he had spotted Ethan. He seems like a good man, Tom said quietly, surprising her. Noah speaks highly of him. He is, Sophie confirmed simply. I'm sorry, Sophie, Tom said suddenly, his voice low and urgent. For everything. For the pain I caused you and the children. For throwing away what we had. Sophie studied his face, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes. I know, she said softly. And someday I'll fully forgive you. For now, I'm grateful we're finding a way forward that puts the children first. You always were the better person, Tom said with a sad smile. I should circulate a bit, then head out. I promised Noah I'd watch his science presentation tomorrow. He'd like that, Sophie said, feeling the weight of their shared past lightening slightly with each word. As Tom moved away, Sophie felt a presence at her side and turned to find Ethan, his expression concerned. Everything okay? He asked quietly. Yes, Sophie said, realizing she meant it. Everything is evolving. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, congratulations, and the quiet thrill of seeing small red dots appear beside several of her paintings, indicating sales. By the time the last guests departed, Sophie felt both exhilarated and exhausted, the emotional and physical demands of the evening catching up with her. Quite a triumph, Ethan said, joining her as she stood before her centerpiece, the battery during a storm, with that single shaft of light breaking through dark clouds. It feels surreal, Sophie admitted. After years of painting between other responsibilities, to have an entire exhibition of my work. You deserve this, Ethan said simply. Your talent has always been there. Now everyone else can see what Noah and I have been telling them all along. Sophie turned to him, struck again by how easily they had come to understand each other in these past months. Thank you for being here tonight. For everything, really. I wouldn't have missed it, Ethan replied, his gaze steady on hers. They stood in comfortable silence, shoulders nearly touching as they contemplated the painting. Around them, the gallery emptied, staff beginning the subtle process of closing for the evening. I should find the children, Sophie said finally. It's been a long night. Of course. Ethan hesitated, then added, I was wondering if you might join me for dinner tomorrow. Just the two of us. The invitation hung between them, simple yet significant, acknowledging the gradual shift in their relationship from friendship towards something deeper. "I'd like that," Sophie replied, her smile genuine and unguarded. Outside, Charleston had transformed into a rare winter wonderland, a light dusting of frost, silvering the historic rooftops and palm trees with white. Emma immediately began photographing the magical scene, while Noah and Lily tilted their heads back to catch the shimmer of frost in the streetlights. "It's beautiful," Sophie breathed, watching the night air crystallize in the glow of street lamps. "A perfect ending to a perfect evening," Lottie declared, joining them on the museum steps. "Or perhaps a perfect beginning." As they walked together through the quiet, frost-covered streets, Lottie, the children, and Lily a few steps ahead, Ethan beside her, Sophie felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The past year had brought pain and upheaval, forcing her to navigate unfamiliar waters and weather unexpected storms. But it had also brought clarity, strength, and the rediscovery of her own voice both as an artist and as a woman. Charleston had endured centuries of storms, each one reshaping its shorelines but never diminishing its essential character. Sophie realized she had done the same, allowing change to transform but not diminish her, finding new strength in the rebuilding. As they reached the corner where Lottie would depart for her Sullivan's Island cottage, Sophie looked back at the harbor, where moonlight now silvered the water and the city lights reflected like scattered stars. The scene before her was both familiar and entirely new, like her life, like her heart, like the future unfolding before her with unexpected promise. Some tides changed quickly, dramatically, reshaping everything in their path. Others moved with subtle persistence, their transformation visible only over time. But all tides eventually brought renewal, carrying away what was broken and delivering fresh possibilities to waiting shores. Sophie smiled, feeling the gentle weight of Ethan's hand finding hers in the December darkness. Whatever tides came next, she was ready to meet them, not alone, but surrounded by love, strengthened by adversity, and finally beautifully herself. In Tides of Redemption, we journey through the life of Sophie Reynolds, a woman who confronts the painful reality of betrayal while rediscovering her own strength and resilience. This narrative beautifully illustrates the fundamental principle of cause and effect, how the choices we make shape our lives and the lives of those around us. Sophie's transformation from a heartbroken wife to a celebrated artist exemplifies the truth that goodness and integrity will yield beautiful results, even when the path is fraught with challenges. The story serves as a poignant reminder that our actions carry significant weight. Choosing to act with compassion, honesty, and respect not only enriches our own lives, but also positively influences the lives of others. As we navigate our own experiences, we should reflect on whether we are making choices that align with our values of integrity and kindness. Are we, like Sophie, able to reclaim our voices and stand strong in the face of adversity? We invite you to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Have you ever faced a situation where your choices led to unexpected consequences? What lessons did you learn from those experiences? Your insights could inspire others who may be facing similar challenges. If you found this exploration of love, loss, and redemption meaningful, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Endless Romance, for more heartfelt stories and discussions. Together, let's continue to celebrate the beauty of life and the strength of the human spirit as we navigate our journeys. Your stories matter and we want to hear them. Join our community today,